And if you have been impatient with airline and airplane security in the past, wait until there's a resumption of flights. There's going to be a great change in this country. If you fly in the Middle East or through many parts of Europe, you're often several times questioned before you can get on the flight, as well as all the electronic security that you have to go through. You have to get to the airport well in advance of the scheduled departure time of the plane. And those will be some of the new procedures that are bound to be put into effect in this country. El Al, in fact, has undercover people on board, armed, trained sharpshooters who fly on all their international flights. It could come to that in America. One former State Department official was saying today we may even have to have some form of air cover in America, hard as that is to believe. But as you look at these scenes, you know the consequences of not having very tight security at our airports. Let's go to Pat Dawson now, who has been keeping track for us of the rescue efforts downtown and of the fires that continue to burn in Lower Manhattan. Pat?
Tom, we are getting to the point of, I guess, what is best described as an unofficial shift change. We have seen for about the past half hour a number of New York City firefighters principally leaving here, leaving the scene, moving out, along with their vehicles. In many cases, those vehicles in total disarray, seriously damaged. We were able to grab one of them to speak to us. This is firefighter Anthony Pasquarelli. Am I getting that right, from Engine 204?
Yes.
Can you tell us, first of all, when you got here?
Approximately 12 o'clock. And like you said, there's no words to describe what happened. There's numerous companies that are still in there. And, you know.
Now, have you heard the reports? We have heard a report from the New York City Firefighters Union that perhaps as many as half of the original firefighters who responded, perhaps as many as 10 or 11 companies, perhaps 200 men have been lost.
We operate inside the building, you know, so it's a possibility. Nobody wants to hope. I'm hoping everybody pulls through, you know. Hopefully God's with us, so.
Is that word making its way through amongst the rescue workers through the afternoon?
No, nobody's going to say anything until they have a definite answer. Mm-hmm. Like I said, everybody hopes that everyone pulls through. Nobody wants to come up with a number yet. We're still hopeful.
Tell me what is going on in there over the last 2 or 3 hours. Are you still fighting fires in there?
Yes, there's numerous high-rises that are still on fire that we're trying to battle, and we can't get close to it because of the rubble piled up as much as 100 feet. So it's just a tremendous effort with all the agencies of the city.
How many firefighters would you say and other rescue workers are in there working on these fires?
Like I said, it's hard to say. This is probably 3/4 of the city here. Mm-hmm. You know, they were pulling people off vacation, whoever wasn't working. So
the fire's still burning in there. Have you heard of any buildings that may still be in danger?
No, none at this time. The last one, I believe, was 7 World Trade over here, and nothing at this time, though.
Yeah. You said the rubble. If you give me some idea of the rubble, how big it is, how much there is. I mean, the thought of 100
blocks. It's a 40-story building, and both World Trade Centers and all the little buildings that were surrounding. It's just blocks of rubble. There's no way to describe it unless you're actually up there looking at it. They're sending everybody back to get rest because, like I said, the city's hurting for members, and they're going to need everyone fresh for the rest of the city. God forbid something happens anywhere else. So they're returning companies to get rest and wash up at the firehouse, but we have to stay at the firehouse, in case anything happens.
Firefighter Anthony Pasquarelli, thank you so much. We know it's been a very difficult day for you. Thank you. Firefighter Anthony Pasquarelli, the New York Fire Department, Engine 204, who, as he said, has been here, Tom, since about noon this afternoon. He relays the information that is not terribly optimistic in the fact that they are still fighting fires in there, and they are having a very, very difficult time getting to them because of the enormous amount of debris. As he described, a 40-story skyscraper and 2 110-story towers coming down. The debris, obviously, extraordinarily difficult to work your way through. Tom?
All right, thank you very much. Pat Dawson, still on the scene in Midtown Manhattan. We want to share with you just some of the president's speech that he made to the nation tonight at 8:31 from the Oval Office after a day in which he flew from Florida to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, then onto the Strategic Air Command headquarters in Omaha, where in a secure bunker he conducted a national security meeting and then flew back to Washington because he felt that it was important to address this nation on this night from the Oval Office, the symbol of power and presidential authority. Here is some of what the president had to say tonight.
This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world.
And the president also said that we will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them. I've asked former UN Ambassador Richard Holbrooke to join us once again. He was the principal architect, of course, of the Dayton Peace Accords. And I think, Richard, for a lot of Americans, there must be a great deal of confusion tonight about the Islamic radicals around the world and then Islamic fundamentalists and other people who have, this is the fastest growing faith in the world after all, and who do feel, if not strongly allied with America, they feel strongly that this act of terrorism that has been visited upon this country today is intolerable and unacceptable.
Well, that's right, Tom. And as you said earlier in this program, the overwhelming majority of people of Islamic faith, including the 7 million Islamic Americans, do not share this philosophy or advocate these acts, and it is vitally important to recognize that to be a member of that faith is not to be associated with this horrible deed. To your point, there has been a growing fundamentalism in the world for many years, which you have covered in many areas of the world. Now we face its consequences at home at a level that is without precedent in American history. I have no doubt that the United States government will, when it decides how to respond. And I think it's very important, as you just pointed out, that President Bush tonight said that they would make no distinction between the people who committed the act and those who harbor it. And I think for your viewers, it's important to underscore that if, in fact, it's Osama bin Laden, as you have reported, seems likely, then the Taliban and other governments in Afghanistan and the region who have harbored these people are going to face the same consequences. I think the rules of the game are going to shift because of this. One last point on this, Tom, and that is the international side of it. We cannot do this alone. We need the support of our allies. We need the support of Russia, which has often played both sides, of China, which has stayed much too much to the sidelines. And finally, we need to work with the moderate Arab states who must be as upset as we are in some ways at what happened, but don't like to show any break in the solidarity.
We know on Flight 11, that was the American Airlines flight, the first one that hit the World Trade Tower, a flight attendant was able to call the American Airlines Operations Center. The flight attendant informed them that a number of flight attendants had been stabbed and that the perpetrators had stormed the cockpit. She was also able to tell them, apparently, the seat number of at least one of the hijackers. She was able to give them that information. We also know that there were some cell phone calls from at least 2 of the other planes. There was a cell phone call, as you have reported earlier, from the plane that slammed into the Pentagon, a woman calling her husband, saying that these hijackers were on board, that they had box cutters, those sorts of knives, and they had herded all of the passengers into the back of the plane. And we understand there was also a cell phone call on the United 175 flight. That was the other flight that hit the World Trade Tower. Apparently, a son on that plane called his father from his cell phone and also said there were hijackers on board with knives. So we do know that as the events were unfolding, what was going on 30,000 feet above the United States was being communicated. Of course, unfortunately, there was nothing the people on the ground could do about any of this except watch in horror as these planes ended up where they ended up.
Well, thanks very much, Lisa Stark, who has given a very clear picture many times today on what precisely happened, or at least as much as we know of what happened. Thank you. On board those planes, we do not very often make recommendations for people's behavior from this chair, but as Lisa was talking, I checked in with my children, and who are deeply distressed, as I think young people are across the United States. And so if you're a parent, you got a kid in some other part of the country, call them up, exchange observations. People have been getting onto sites on the web, which is a very good, vigorous way for people, very good way for people to communicate. Some of the things people have been telling us at ABC News, at abcnews.com, after today, nothing changes. Sorry, everything changes. Nothing will ever be the same. The way you've lived your life, enjoyed your freedom, your very personal expression, it all changes after today. From someone else, only a month ago, I laid on a bench outside the World Trade Center and marveled at what man could create, looking up at those 110 stories, and now I stare in disbelief at what man can take away. I want retribution, said one person to abcnews.com, and that's a sentiment that has been widely, deeply expressed in the heart of the political establishment in Washington and by people in every walk of life across the country. And as George Stephanopoulos and Leon Panetta, the former White House Chief of Staff, have made very clear, and as President clearly knows already, one of the things the President has to do is be patient and understand who it is who did this before the country can do anything by way of retaliation. Here's a slightly chilling one. If they can pull off an act like this, they are certainly capable of eventually sending nuclear weapons this way. And this is very interesting. How can people keep calling it the modern Pearl Harbor? At least we knew who we were up against back then. Of course, the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese was a surprise to a great many Americans in the middle of afternoon ball games. This is the first time today that Major League Baseball has ever canceled all its games since D-Day, the invasion of Normandy in World War II. And one of the enormously frustrating things for the intelligence establishment, for the political establishment, for all of us in the country today, not to mention anyone else in the world who was a friend of the United States, perhaps even a foe, is to understand who it was who actually did this. And the reverberations from this are indeed global. Air traffic, we already know, listening to Lisa Stark and our own reporting earlier today, is snarled around the world, especially in Europe. The impact of what happens there in terms of transportation and commerce. The stock exchange was closed today. It all has an effect somewhere else. Any place there is a proposed mass gathering, in many parts of the world, they are rethinking it. In Germany, they have now canceled the Frankfurt car show, which is one of the biggest car shows, if not the biggest car show in the world. There's some consideration to canceling the Oktoberfest, the great beer and culture festival in Munich, in Germany. France has called a general security alert, and I'm just told that Ted Koppel is with us in London, live. Ted has been in London and now can go even further than that, please, Ted, on telling us what's happened in Europe and as much as you know elsewhere.
Well, I must tell you, Peter, I've spent the better part of this day trying to get from where I was, which about 12 hours ago was in Italy, to where you are. And as you well know, and as you've been reporting for much of the day, getting into the United States from overseas is a very difficult task indeed. But it's just about, what time is it here? 2:15 in the morning here in London. And some of the early editions of the newspapers have come through, and I thought you might like to take a look at them. Let me hold them up. There's not a great deal that differentiates the tabloids today from the more serious newspapers. You can see it: Apocalypse, New York, September 11th, says the Daily Mail. Declaration of war, says the Daily Express. And then this one, which perhaps goes farther than it might: is this the end of the world, from the Daily Star? And so it goes. The Mirror, war on the world. The Sun, the day that changed the world. And now one of the more serious newspapers, The Independent, and again the same horrific pictures that we have been seeing all day long. And The Independent says, Doomsday America, the times of London when war came to America. And so it has gone. And I must tell you, Peter, the only thing I can tell you is, as you know, when we're overseas, American tourists tend to turn to folks like us, expecting that we know something. I'm afraid I knew less than they did. It was some other tourists who informed me earlier in the day of what had happened, and I went rushing back to my hotel room and packed while I was watching the television scenes that you have been reporting on all day. And all I can tell you is that this was a day when, as soon as people found out you were an American, they turned to you with expressions of grief, expressions of horror, expressions of outrage, and an offer to do anything they could do to help, which in my case meant getting a little bit closer to New York or Washington. Peter?
Ted, have you managed, I totally sympathize with what you've gone through today, and as bad as a day it is for many Americans, I understand what you mean when you say it's been a good day to be reminded that people around the world admire and sympathize with Americans, suffer with it. Can you give us some sense, if you have any whatsoever, just from looking at the reporting there, as to how governments are responding as well as individuals?
Well, again, Peter, and you've been in this situation often enough to be sympathetic to it. I literally just landed in London. We had to charter from Paris to get over here because flying into Heathrow wasn't that easy, especially at this time of night. And have only landed now and been reading the wires in the car coming in. And I do know that Tony Blair has expressed strong condemnation and, of course, a sense of oneness with the United States. Perhaps, Peter, the most interesting thing that I've heard, and just read a little bit of a transcript of a television newscast that came out of Tehran earlier this evening, is that the Iranian president, Khatami, is quoted by the Iranian anchors earlier this evening as expressing his outrage and offering to help in any way that he can against this form of worldwide terrorism. Coming from Iran, that is quite remarkable, as I'm sure you know.
I do indeed, though perhaps a little more understandable coming from President Khatami, who is regarded as the president of Iran, who, as you well know, is trying to move the country closer to some kind of sense of democratic representation than others in the country are willing him to do. But I think we've all known for a long time that sometimes elements within the Iranian
and perhaps, for me at least, the most unsettling thought of the day of all was one man who described going down through the darkened and very wet stairwell because of the sprinklers that had gone off and seeing people who were trapped in their wheelchairs, the large mobilized wheelchairs that couldn't fit into the stairwell, and certainly the elevators were not working. He got out, and shortly after that, that building came down. It was that kind of a day, and there are going to be so many more of those stories, an untold number at this hour, hundreds, perhaps thousands. Dateline's James Pauley takes us through some of the horror of this day and what happened at the World Trade Center.
The mighty World Trade Center tumbling down. Everyday New Yorkers had to run for their lives. How fragile the city seemed today. We deployed a team of Dateline staffers to bring us images of a city under siege on handheld digital cameras.
What I saw today on the streets of Manhattan really were the extremes of New York. It's the best and the worst of people.
I got 20 blocks away when the smell and the taste really hit me. Way in the distance, the huge cloud on the horizon, but I could taste and smell something that was like the worst electrical fire ever imaginable.
They brought us a startling glimpse of what it was like to be at ground zero of a major terrorist attack.
What's it like down there?
Save 6 people. I tried my best to try to save everybody.
First, get away, then get home. Businesses were closed and buildings evacuated. Thousands upon thousands were left to negotiate a maze of closed streets and suspended services.
Disappeared and everybody stopped running. And I didn't know if my dad is going to have a father, if I have my husband anymore.
real sense of panic on the streets among the tens of thousands of pedestrians, and it was easy to see why. Look to the horizon on the south, and you see an enormous gray-black cloud from the explosion.
As they moved towards safety uptown, people tried to keep up with the flurry of events any way they could. Even the wounded walked. This woman was on the 19th floor of the World Trade Center when the first explosion hit. Hurt, but lucky to get out before the building collapsed. We found her 30 blocks north, heading to Bellevue Medical Center.
A huge cloud of gray, huge cloud of gray came and everyone started running and stampeding and everyone was falling on the ground. And I don't know what knocked me over. I don't know if it was a person or just the force of the wind. But I fell down, I just covered my head. I prayed that a building wouldn't fall on me, and I really thought I was going to die.
Doctors and medical students lined up like extras on the set of a disaster movie. Almost immediately after the attack, along with all three major airports, the city's subways, bridges, tunnels, and major highways were all closed. The FDR Drive, normally a winding snarl of congested traffic, empty. Thousands of commuters from New York's outer boroughs were left stranded in Manhattan. By mid-afternoon, a police officer on the scene estimated that more than 20,000 people had crossed the 59th Street Bridge on foot. Meanwhile, Grand Central Station was jammed, but the trains were running until noon.
I remember standing in Grand Central and watching a man and a woman just scream and embrace each other and feel relief. I felt their relief to see each other again. After people had been managing to get out for about 15 minutes, all of a sudden they announced that they were evacuating the building, and people were ordered to get out immediately, and workers in their orange vests were running for the exits, and we didn't know what was going on. We just ran with them.
Confused passengers poured out of the building after a bomb threat.
It hit me that this building really could blow up, and I was scared. I was afraid that the building literally could blow up underneath my feet.
All around the city, it was a mass migration of hundreds of thousands of people, but uncannily quiet. Perhaps it was the unspeakable horrors many had seen.
It was orderly, but it was chaotic. People were shocked. Everyone was dazed. People didn't really want to look each other in the eye, I think, for fear of breaking down. The question on everybody's lips seemed to be, what is going on, and is there more of it that's going to come?
This was supposed to be Election Day in New York. As if anyone took note, it was officially called off. Everything was. What was open was tightly locked down.
What's that?
Can't be doing no pictures.
Okay, it's NBC
Why
News.
don't you understand?
It's NBC News.
I don't care who it is.
Security at all buildings that might be targets was extremely tight. Our own building, the famous tourist destination at Rockefeller Plaza, was evacuated, but for NBC's news operations to bring you this story. And all over Manhattan, there was this strange sort of gridlock.
The uptown avenues in Manhattan have been turned into virtual parking lots as everyone tries to flee northward. Meanwhile, the downtown avenues have all been sealed off, but for emergency vehicles.
Cell phone service came and went. Anxious people called their loved ones the old-fashioned way. Sometimes that didn't work either.
People were forced to use payphones, which is kind of a joke in Manhattan because it's hard to find a payphone that works.
The only thing that was easy today was getting lost in the scramble.
She doesn't have a cell phone. They don't work anyway. She is not mobile because she's got emphysema and she can't walk very fast.
David Douglas's 64-year-old mother lives in an apartment building just 4 blocks from the World Trade Center. Soon after the attack, she had chest pains. So he flagged a passing car and the driver headed for the nearest hospital.
But I said, look, lady, please, my mom can't walk. Please, please just take her north as much as you can because she can't breathe well.
He tried to follow on his rollerblades, but lost track of the car and spent the rest of the day searching hospitals.
So I just want to know, is there any system of finding people with...
Well, they're doing the best. We're doing the best we can. It's pretty chaotic.
He searched family reunion centers.
Lucille Abato. A-B-A-T-O.
And even public schools desperate to find his mother.
Are there any people being kept here?
Finally, after 4 hours of futile searching, he called home. There was a message on his answering machine.
It's my mom.
She was safe, staying with a friend in his very own apartment building.
She's in my building.
For two New Yorkers, a small moment of comfort in a day when so many others will find none.
Not just me and you, but all these...
We could all use a little good news, and that is so typical of New York. It's the tough guy city in terms of reputation, but of course it's got a tender heart. Chris Colvin, one of my colleagues, told me tonight that there are reports as well of very long lines outside all the blood banks in the city because the line has gone out that they do need blood, and in fact they've turned them away in some instances. And I had here a moment ago, let me find it, there's been a call that has gone out for medical personnel, particularly for physicians. Doctors in and near New York City, contact 518-431-7600 if you can offer assistance. Medical personnel are needed. The number is, see if we can get this on the screen later, 1-800-628-0193. As you might expect with all the medical facilities in New York City, the doctors and the medical personnel are overtaxed, to say the very least. So they're looking for physicians in the city. Many of them who are not emergency room physicians, have their own private practices, are asked to respond to the hospitals of their choice as well. MSNBC's Edie Magnus is in Pennsylvania now, about 80 miles from Pittsburgh, where one of those planes went into the ground today. It did not hit a target of any kind, and she has the latest for us now. Edie?
Tom, I'm on a country road that goes between the towns of Lambertsville and Shanksville in Pennsylvania. And beyond all of these lights you see, the glare of the media satellite trucks, it is a very dark night here in the country, but it is very busy. About a half a mile to a mile or so beyond, just over my shoulder, sort of where you see all those trucks headed down in an open field of an old strip mine, is where lies the wreckage of United Flight 93, which of course, as you all have been reporting, took off from Newark, destined for San Francisco, never got there. 38 passengers, 7 crew, no survivors. The debris here is spread over a 3 to 4 mile radius, which has now been completely sealed off and is being treated, according to the FBI, as a crime scene.